the meeting to order at 2:01 p.m. Do we have any additions or deletions from the agenda, Ms. Middleton?
No, I believe we do not have any additions or deletions.
So I can call for a motion for agenda approval for our meeting. Councillor Rob, all in favor? Jamie?
Aye.
Thanks. Adoption of previous minutes, August 10th, as attached. I'll call for a motion. Okay, any questions, concerns? No? Okay, a motion from Chandra, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jamie. New business, 5.1, we have our Q3 financial update staff report. I'll turn the time over to Ms. Middleton for that.
Thank you, Chair Holiday. So I'd just like to take you, I would just like to take you briefly through the financial results. This is the third quarter, so this is January to September 30th. If we go to the page number that has the variance report by category, I'll discuss that page first. Overall, you can see we have a net surplus going into the end of the third quarter and start of the fourth quarter of $173,882. There are a number of notes which I'll go through. Total revenues are down $196,000. We have the corresponding total expenses. We're seeing a surplus of just under $371,000. So to go through the various notes, we will start on the revenue side. As you can see, taxes, we have an unfavorable variance of just under $51,000, and this just represents the adjustment to the non-residential mill rate, as well as a decline in the residential assessed values. This is something that we've known from really the start of the second quarter. Franchise fees, we also have an unfavorable variance. Generally, this will likely probably even out by the end of the year. That number is provided to us by our franchisees. So generally, we'll start to see that equal out coming into the end of 2020. Operating grants, we haven't received our MSI operating funds for 2020 yet, so that variance puts it up over almost $39,000, $34,000 of that is going to be that operating grant, and we should see that money shortly from the government. Other revenues are down for a variety of reasons, which are explained in the next page at the back. As well, our penalties are down somewhat, and this is due to largely the traffic fines, the funds that we receive. They're delayed in the time frame that we see them, but with the initial start of COVID, we expect to see a decline. But we are anticipating we may see some upside in this coming into the end of 2020 and into 2021. Keeping in mind that there's quite a delay in the payments, so we may see this particular line item balance out coming into the end of 2020. As well, tax penalties are down slightly, which in some respects is a positive for the town, because that simply indicates that people are paying their taxes. So we would rather have them paying their taxes than have a large penalty line. So that to me is seen as favorable, even though there's a decline from the budget. And then license and permits as well, we have an unfavorable variance there, and part of that is some of the decline in the business activity, certainly with COVID and what's been going on. So we're seeing that decline, and there may be a little bit of an upside coming into the end of the year, but we probably won't know that until the end of fourth quarter. On the expenses side, just to go through some of the high level ones, we have wages and benefits. So we have a favorable variance there, and we'll continue to see that into the end of the year. And that really represents a couple of declines. The pool salaries and wages, of course, was less than budget because of the time frame that the pool was open. As well, the legislative council group per diems, and this is just a product of we're not traveling as much, and this is all the way from, you know, council to administration. And that's evident again in training and conferences. So coming into the end of the year, we may see some savings in that particular line item, and that's just because of what's happened with COVID and people are not, you know, administration and council aren't traveling. Engineering and legal is also down, so we have a favorable variance there. And third-party requisitions, and this is just, the third-party requisitions is just a timing of when we receive the requisition billings from our partners, and these are really the two large ones, which are Schruck and West End. So this is just a timing, so we will see that level out to the end of the year. As well, general and building maintenance and equipment maintenance and fuel. A couple of reasons why those two items have seen a decline, and that is, part of it is the town of Okotoks taking over the garbage program, the solid waste program, and so we've been able to have some savings in those two particular areas. So although it's only for a 6-month time frame that program has been in place, we'll see those savings till the end of the year. Utilities, we have a favorable variance as well, and this is because of the timeline of producing our financial statements, we don't get the opportunity to put the September billings in. They won't show up until the end of October. So we received that bill and it was about $9,500. So we have a little bit of savings, but for the most part, that will be, it's pretty well bang on to the end of the year. And then the last one is contracted services, and this is largely we experienced some delays in the early part of the year and middle part because of COVID. With the mild weather, we were able to continue doing some of our maintenance program through to October, so we're expecting to see some of these particular services will be performed to the end of the year. So overall, if you go to the next page, this is by business unit. As well, we have a couple of lines that we've added, and that's the projection net, and we also have a line item where we are documenting COVID costs. So as you'll see in the projection net, we are projecting just over $6,000 surplus coming into the end of the year. This is based on our expectations once we have all the costs in. As well, when you look at the following line, with the COVID, those costs built in, if you go to the back page, we have what we've determined, we have a breakdown by business unit for COVID impact. So what we started to do at the onset of COVID is we started to try and track some of the costs that were directly related to COVID. And we've gone through, and rather than just provide a net number, we tried to determine what is the revenue impact and then what is the expense impact. So on the revenue side, we have a deficit of $176,000. So that is revenue lost due to COVID. And this is what we're expecting to the end of 2020. And then we have expenses that we've saved. So this would be particular areas like the swimming pool where we've saved a considerable amount of money. With the flare and derrick, although we didn't have revenue source, we don't have corresponding costs to offset. So overall, we're seeing the net impact with COVID is about 68,000, just under 69,000. So there is a program in place with the province, and they're going to assist with some of that revenue and lost during the time frame. So we will continue to monitor and put together the estimates and the final impact to the end of 2020 as to what the impact was to the town. So this is what we have so far. This could change coming into the end of the year, but this is what we've projected thus far. As well, we've attached the 2020 capital projects update, and this is for Q3. There is, the costs, most of the costs right now are really being directed towards Sunset Boulevard, and that's just about getting that feasibility study and the ensuring that we have accurate engineering costs as we determine that project where it's gonna sit for the 2021 budget. So that one we've spent just under 69,000, and then we have a number of other particular projects that are either in the RFP stage or have been completed, or the equipment has been purchased. So as of right now, at the end of Q3, we've spent just over $164,000 in capital costs. And then the last page of the report is our RFQ progress report. And we had a couple projects in Q3 that we went out for tender on. One of them was the Black Diamond and Turner Valley Intermunicipal Economic Development Committee, and that was awarded. The facilitation services, amalgamation, negotiation, and the land use bylaw. So those 3 items went out for tender and were awarded in the 3rd quarter. I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Robb?
First one, maybe unrelated, but all over Facebook this weekend we heard how much money, like Black Diamond got $278,000 from a financial assistance. I assume that we got some as well. I think we talked about that recently. Do we have a number, or is that something you want to talk about, or?
We do. We did get $246,000 is coming to us, related to offset some of the impact on COVID. So as we continue to go through our costs and our lost revenue to nail down a number, we are very happy to have that money. We have it and have to report back to the government by the end of March.
Do you have to use it all, or if you don't use it all, can you still keep it, or what's the scoop?
So if we do not use it all, we have to return it.
There you go.
But we're gonna do our best to make sure that we have really accurate and good information that we send back to the government, and it reflects the needs that we have determined that have come out of the impact of COVID. So some of that stuff is around, PPE equipment and things like that, but there are, there have been some costs that we have absorbed, and certainly revenues that we have lost.
Well, you have it listed here, like this page of for COVID implications, so that's a good start for looking at the bill, eh?
Yeah, and just to address through the chair, the restrictions, it's quite restricted on what we can use that money for. So we just have to make sure that we have really good details and backup to support the submission that we make. But yeah, the money is coming.
Yep. Go ahead.
Just to the chair, follow on to Councillor Robb's question. The $246,000, I assume, is not reflected in the net operating surplus that you're forecasting for the full year of 6,000. So we would expect that to go up by some amount.
So to address your question to the chair, you are correct that it's not reflected in our numbers at this particular moment in time. And we talked about putting it in, but I think what administration determined that we wanted to get a really solid idea of what the impact was, and then we'll put that information in.
Just quick follow-up question. Because we've offered a tax deferral program for people, there's technically time value for money interest. Is that at all recoupable through this, or is that not?
Well,
just curious.
So to address your question through the chair, we are going to look at and make sure that the guidelines that have been provided, we will ensure that we capture whatever revenue lost and expenses that we can, to ensure that we the impact to the residents of the town is very minimal. So we will look at all of those costs, including, the fact that we did decide to not increase taxes, to residents just because of the COVID and realizing that there was a certain amount of financial strain for residents of the town. So we will look at all of them, and no rock will be left uncovered, guaranteed.
Hey, I have a question too, sorry, whenever I can fit into the queue.
Yeah, you can go ahead right now.
Sure, thanks, Corinne, always appreciate this detailed information. The 2020 projection, so that 6,500 that we kind of alluded to earlier. So the question I would have is what portion of the reduced expenses that we've seen in 2020 are amounts that would roll forward into 2021, if that's clear, that question. So what I'm trying to wrap my head around is yes, we may have saved some costs in 2020, but does that mean that we're going to have incremental costs in 2021, and is that reflected in the operating budget drafts that we've seen today?
Good question. I'll pass that over to you.
So to address your question through the chair, so as it stands right now, Councillor Wilkie, what we usually do is we don't project the quarterly budgets having any carry forward yet. So we assume at Q3 that unless we have a big project that's significant, that's not gonna get completed, and then we'll identify that up front. Otherwise, we won't identify it until Q4. So if we have something that might have a potential cost that's gonna roll over, we won't identify it until later in the year, near the end of the year. Did that answer your question?
Councillor Wilkie?
Sorry, I'm on mute here. Sorry about that. So that's helpful. So I guess if I understood that correctly, there may be some additional costs that roll forward into 2021. They just wouldn't be recognized until Q4. Is that a fair characterization of what I heard there?
Yeah, through the chair, you're correct. So, for example, if we don't spend or complete some of the asset management work, we will roll that cost over, and it will be part of the 2021.
Okay, but those costs are already reflected in the 2020 budget, so it would essentially be reduction of cost to 2020, increase in costs to 2021. Okay. Okay, that's helpful. And I also just wanted to say to say kudos on the RFPs. There's a long list of bidders on a lot of those, so that was fantastic to see that there's a lot of interest. I think it just reflects the current environment. On the capital project side of things, that Dunham Lane sanitary upgrade. So basically, so the developer hasn't decided not to proceed with this in 2020. So that would essentially roll over into 2021. And can you just, and further to that, can you remind me what our funding source was on Dunham Lane?
So to answer your question through the chair, the funding source was that we were gonna use some levies for that we had available, and of course the developer would have been responsible for paying some of that as well. So I believe this is why that project has been put on hold.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. I know it had to be timed with development. I think that was a big part of the reason why we were doing it. So I just wanted to make sure that didn't have any impact on sources for it. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Wilkie. Councillor Rob, and then Todd, I believe.
I have another question. Urban Systems, $40,000 for land use bylaw. Did that come in kind of where you hoped it? Was it higher? Was it lower? Is that kind of, are you okay with that? Are you comfortable with that? Is that a good deal?
through the chair, I'm gonna divert my answer to, CAO Todd Sharp.
Thanks, through Councillor Holiday. So we'd asked council for $100,000 as a maximum upset, but as we worked through it and determined what it was that the planning department could do in-house versus what we would tender out, we had thought it would come in around $60,000. That was, kind of a loose estimate. So the fact that it came in at 40 is, makes us happy, and certainly, I think Urban Systems was able to sharpen their pencil only because they're familiar with our operation. So they knew where some of those things had come to. So it was win-win, and certainly it wasn't purely based on price. There was a broader evaluation criteria that was used because it was an RFP, not a request for quote. But the 40,000 is where the winning bid came in.
That's good. I thought it was lower, so that's why I asked.
Okay, I just had one final question, if everyone else is good. Oh, you have another one? Okay. I'll just ask this first and then I'll go to you. I just want to be clear on this breakdown by business unit, the COVID impact. For something like the Flare and Derrick, the expenses were all in-house staff, I think usually maintaining it, which we still are paying the same staff, or not. Like, how is that a savings if, I'm not sure I'm explaining this very well, if those people are still, they're just doing other things around town versus working at the Flare and maintaining it. Did you want to take that one, Todd?
If you don't mind, I will,
Okay.
because it'll tie into another response I wanted to make about this. So,
Okay.
so the that's true. Some of the work that goes on in that building is done by staff, but it's also third-party contractors. If we're not wearing it, we're not using it out, or wearing it out, so we don't need to bring the contractors in. We're using fewer utilities. We don't have to hire the cleaners extra to come in after events, that sort of a thing. So there are some what I'll call third-party expenses that we didn't see. So if that answers your question, I'll move on to the revenue versus expenses in this. So Ms. Middleton and I talked a lot about this, and fair is fair. So we got $246,000, by the way, plus 30,000 for MSI operating, which we haven't received yet. The two are coming in one check. So if you hear the number of 280 or whatever it was in Black Diamond, they're probably also quoting the MSI operating. But the 246, I think. So Ms. Middleton said the restrictions were tight. Well, sort of. They were very clear. They were either due to transit revenue loss. You had to be transit related, and most of that is a big city solution. A lot of people weren't riding the bus, therefore you lost all that revenue. And then there was the other solution for the rest of us, which was if you can demonstrate that you lost revenue or incurred extra expenses to due to COVID, you can apply your 240 to that. So then we had to decide, well, what does that look like? I mean, some are clear. We bought extra PP&E, or our director of emergency management put extra time in, or there was staff. Some of that overtime, but truly, in some cases, we saved money due to COVID, and we certainly don't celebrate that, but an obvious example is the delayed opening and scale back of the pool. So fair is fair. We can't take some of the province's money for the lost revenue and take the money for the lost expenses, because truly our delta was less on the expenses. So what we decided to do was use our budgeted amounts as a baseline, and then go up or down from there. So what you see is the variation on the revenue and expenses from baseline budget approved for 2020. And then if we lost revenue and expenses, we took the delta, and saved on expenses, we took the delta, and that's what we'll spend the stimulus money on. Because at the end of the day, we have to file a statement of financial expenditure with the province to show where we spent it and to demonstrate that it was legitimate. So fair is fair. So we're not gonna give from one and take from the other, and say it was a $240,000 expense. It's very realistic that we may not spend all of that 240 due to losses in COVID, and if that's the case, so be it. But the final piece to Councillor Wilkie's question, as far as carryover expenses go, the provincial annual fiscal year ends March 31st. So this money must be spent however we need to spend it by the end of March. So if there are additional expenses that incur, because this thing's long from over, If there's extra expenses we incur, we have up till the end of March to try to identify that, and apply this 240 to that, and then at that point, if there's anything left, we would declare it and turn it back in, so there's still a room and a mechanism to apply for future carryover expenses, as Councillor Wilkie put it, but at some point, the door closes and we have to file a report, so.
And just for clarity, so that would be the first quarter then, anything that okay, yeah, because I figured that that's probably what you have to do, spend by March, because their fiscal year is contrary to your calendar fiscal year.
Right.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Bill, I think you had another question?
Yes, on the RFQ progress report, help me with the facilitation services amalgamation negotiation. Are the two towns using the same facilitator? So is this half of the cost? Okay. And how is it funded? Or do we know?
So to address your question through the chair, so we do have some funds remaining. We hold a bucket of funds, and so does Black Diamond. They have a FAM grant, we have an amalgamation grant, so some of that money is there. And so we have requested it to continue to be carried forward, and we've been assured that we'll have that money available. As well, we will begin to source other avenues of funding to perform the amalgamation function in the next year or so.
Thank you.
Todd?
And so, and to continue with that, so at the last council meeting, council approved the budget amendment for $40,000, of which, for our share, 40 times 2 is 80, leaves a little bit of wiggle room in case there's a change order to the contract. So our share is 40 of that. 16 of that specifically is grant money that we still have from the feasibility study. So the net cost is $24,000 to be paid for out of operating reserves, if necessary. I mean, typically Corinne doesn't move the money around till the end of the year until she sees if she needs to. If we run a surplus in the operating budget at the end of the year, then the transfer from reserves is moot. But that's where it would be, Mr. Rowe.
Right. So I just wanna make sure that came clear. 73 is the cost of the entire contract, and then it's split into two.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Cause yeah,
So,
initially there was some miscommunication there.
No,
Okay.
it's half.
It's half, yeah, our portion is half.
Half of 73.
Thankfully, it's not gonna cost 140 cents at the vote. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. Then I will ask for a motion to accept this, the Q3 financial update. Chandra? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Councillor Wilkie. Okay, next item is tax penalties and tax arrears update. I will pass this over again to Ms. Middleton.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to take you through the staff report on tax penalties and tax arrears update. This is as of October 7th. At the regular business meeting of council held on October 5th, the motion was put forward by Councillor Jamie Wilkie for administration to prepare a report to be presented at the next Finance Advisory Committee and to be presented to council at the next regular meeting to be held on October 19th. So just for your interest, below is the tax penalties and tax arrear balances as of October 7th. The number of roll numbers in arrears is 76, and then we have the 6 that are on the deferred program, which I've shown separately because their payments are not yet due, but they're included in the overall balance. So the outstanding amount currently is $312,000. Of that, just to make note, 57% of those 76 roll numbers are making or attempting to make regular payments. So that's a positive sign that they've made arrangements with the town to make payments. And we always will honor that, whether it be portion of the amount owed or not, we will always take their payments. And then the 6, on the deferred program, those individuals, the deferrals, program ends the end of October, so their amounts will be starting to make the necessary payments on those amounts as well. So if you look at the, current year, we have just under 226,000, and then we have 1, 2 years, 3 years, and then over 3 years. So that is, it's just a bit of an aging report for information only.
Councillor Chandra, and then we'll go to Councillor Wilkie. I know this was something requested by you. I'll let you talk after if you'd like.
I just wanna clarify, cause bottom line says included in the current balance are those utility billings that have been transferred, so there's utility arrears rolled into that as well too, correct?
Yes, you are correct. So just to clarify through the chair, annually, what we will do is those residents or households that do not pay their utility bill, we just do a transfer once a year, and that's just done at the end of December.
Are they typically utility bills in arrears, that are associated with tax arrears as well too, or is there a portion of it that are just utility arrears rolled into here?
No, for the most part, through the chair, there would be tax arrears as well as utility arrears.
Which makes sense, okay, thank you.
Usually somebody, if they're not paying their taxes, they might not be paying utilities, but if they're paying their taxes, okay, gotcha. I understand that in my head, yep. Alright, Councillor Wilkie?
So I'm just trying to, I always struggle with these aging reports, trying to figure out what exactly I'm looking at. So appreciate you bringing this back. The conversation around this came out of just, largely related to 2020 penalties in particular. Just, it's an extraordinary year, obviously. So I was largely interested in, I guess, what the total amount that hasn't been paid this year that we would have expected to have been paid this year. And from what I'm seeing, is that under the current column that I'm looking at then? So 206,000 that aren't on deferrals and 19,000 that are on deferrals, that's the total amount this year?
So through the chair, you are correct. So in the first column is just the penalty. So that's just what the penalty is on the outstanding balance as of the end of 2019. And then the current column includes the penalty plus the current amount outstanding.
That's the penalty plus the current amount outstanding. Okay, perfect. And then, so those penalties, is that penalty specific to 2020 taxes? So for example, does the stuff from 2 years ago also include penalties in it? Or is that the total penalty assessed this year on all previous balances, right? Because I assume that if you're 3 years behind, it continues to accrue penalties, correct?
Through the chair, you are correct.
Okay. So some portion of that 25,000 then is penalties on older balances? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any feel for what the split between that would be? I assume it's information that you could get, and I don't need the answer on the spot. I just might ask for that to come back to council as well.
No, the split is available though. I tried to kind of dial the amount of financial information that I presented, but we do have it.
Okay. Yeah, I will probably just ask that we kind of split that between 2020 versus prior years for the council. So I'll kind of work that into a motion then. Thank you for bringing this back, Corinne. Honestly, I'm interested to hear what other folks on the committee have for thoughts around this, and I do want to be sensitive. There's obviously privacy concerns around these issues as well. but you know, my concern around this was related to those particular 2020 penalties, and you know, I'll throw it to administration. I don't know if there's a need to go into closed on some of this discussion, but I do believe that that's a decision that lays kind of at the council level, whether there's anything that needs to be done there. So thank you for that.
Okay, I had one thought on this as I was looking at it as to what would make it more useful for me as a counselor is to know and to maybe have a little graph showing the amount that was outstanding at the end of the year for the last 5 years. So what was the total amount outstanding? And I know that, I'm pretty sure that was it's reported to municipal affairs, I thought, because I thought when I've been looking at information there on financial statements, I've seen it somewhere. And you have it anyways, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But just to know, you know, how much was outstanding at the end of every year for the last 5 years, or even 10 years if we have that information, just to see the trend. Like if we know that we always have about 100,000 and all of a sudden now we're into COVID and we're getting to the 300,000, that's a pretty important indicator of the economic health of the community. So just to show that trend, I mean, things are gonna look nasty from the beginning of the recession and oil crash, I think, but you know, Jamie, what do you think? Do you get what I'm asking there?
Yeah, I think just seeing whether it's abnormal or not, I think is kind of what we're trying to wrap our heads around. I know there's always some balances, right? I think that would be helpful information. You know, I'm definitely focused on the penalty number in particular, but I think the that total balance would be helpful to understand. What I'm trying to wrap my head around, right, is how much trouble are some people potentially getting into here, right? Like how much behind are folks potentially? How bad a shape are some people in here? And then I think there's strategic implications around that. So yeah, I think that would be a helpful additional information.
Councillor Rob first and then Chandra.
Don't we kinda have that, you guys? Because at the end of 1 year, last year was $85,000. Today, as currently, there's 206,000. Now they still have 3 more months to retire some of that debt, hopefully all that debt, but isn't that kind of an indication that last year was 85,000, this year 206, or what am I missing?
Some people have paid in the meantime, so they're no longer, that last year they were still owing, but this year they're not, because they've paid it back. So we wanted to know what the year-end total was each year.
Wasn't that 85,000? Isn't that the year-end total for last year?
No, because some people would have made payments this year.
Yeah.
So it's not it's not last year's
Oh,
year-end.
it's still going back. I gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this is what's still owing.
Yep, gotcha.
Not what was owing at the end of the
They
year.
could have made payments for the first 9 months of this year, yeah. So that
Yeah.
would have brought that down. Yep, makes sense.
Okay, Chandra?
My question is, there's approximately 43% of folks that are in arrears that aren't making payments based on the number when 57% are making, correct?
So just to clarify through the chair, so of this amount outstanding, 57% of those people are trying to make payments that are in arrears.
Yeah, so that means there's 43% of the people in arrears that aren't making any effort to correct or resolve this.
Correct.
So what does that mean in terms of staff and the efforts around it, because it's still money lost for the town? And that means then it has to go through another process, correct? The
Yeah,
tax roll,
so
yeah.
through the chair, we have a third party that assists with some of that collection called tax service.
Okay.
And so they will step in once an account gets into a certain level of arrears. And I think part of that is it allows us to have a bit of an arm's length relationship, and then the resident will deal with a third party. And although we will still sometimes have dialogue, they'll make payment arrangements through them.
Okay, and the reason why I'm asking is because there has been such a high turnover of sales within the town of Turner Valley, and I'm assuming that some of these residences, and this is an assumption because it appears that there's a lot of rental properties going on the market right now and being sold. I'm wondering if that number's gonna start looking better, because upon the sale, then you're going to be able to capture the outstanding taxes. And that's just an observation from living in the town and seeing what's happening out there with real estate.
Yeah, so through the chair, absolutely, we've had a couple of quite large payments. So, you know, there's a point in time where that arrears starts to be a bit of a problem. And so what you'll see sometimes is a resident will get to very close to where, you know, there's a possibility that they could have some issues with maintaining their house. And then they come in and that resident will make a payment. So, but we have been seeing some payments. I think that the amount of payments we've seen in July and August have actually been quite surprising to me.
Yeah, no, and that's why I wanted to ask you about this, because that's what I'm seeing, and that's what I feel is probably going to be happening, is you're gonna see some of these tax arrears that they've been resolved strictly because of what the real estate market's doing here in Turner Valley in terms of people getting out of the rental properties, selling them, and you've got the homeowner and you've been able to recover those costs. Okay.
So there was a couple suggestions or amendments that we wanted. You got those captured?
No, Councillor Wolke said that he was gonna actually
Okay.
make it.
Formalize it?
Yeah,
Okay.
formalize it for me, so
Okay.
I need for him to actually add that.
So Councillor Wilkie, do you want to put into a motion the amendment that you're looking for and maybe mine too?
Unfortunately, I was going to just say as amended, but I can let me sketch out a. So I think it would be the motion. Sorry, I do have one more question, and then but I would be willing to make the motion. And let me go to the recommended one here. So motion would be that the Finance Advisory Committee recommend to Council to accept the report as information with the following amendments to be made by administration. Number one, with the division of tax penalties year to date between balances due, or between, I'm gonna have to write this out, I'm sorry, is that Mary Ellen there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's in the room trying to sketch this out, but I'm gonna put it into an email. Who's the best person to email it to, rather than trying to do this on the fly?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then maybe I can
Yeah.
ask my last question.
Yeah, email it to Todd.
Okay. And then, yeah, so my question was, and now it's completely gone as I was trying to think about changes. Okay, I apologize for that. It'll probably come back to me at the end of the meeting, but so motion is that Finance Advisory Committee recommend to Council to accept the amended report with the following amendments. Division of penalties between 2020 amounts and amounts due on prior years.
Yeah.
And the addition of total arrears outstanding at the end of each of the 3 previous fiscal years. I don't know if 3 is good enough. I think
I'd like to see 5 minimum.
5. Okay, yeah, I'm fine with 5. I can make that.
If you're bored, you can go 10, but I'll ask for 5.
Okay, I have it.
Bill, did I see your hand up? No, that was.
No, I was just gonna comment that, your point on the 5 years was a really good point. The only thing wrong with it was you got to make it before I did.
Oh. That's funny. Great minds think alike.
Hey, I remember my question now before we put a vote. Can I ask it now that it came back to me?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, So the number I'd heard for penalties before, kind of thrown around during budgeting discussions, was a number somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000-ish annually. So when I see that number of 25,000 at this point in the year, and recognizing we're not all the way through the year yet, does that mean that that number may be smaller than anticipated this year, or that might have been reflected in the budget this year?
Yeah, it was reflected earlier in the document we just went through. I'm trying to find it, penalties.
Yeah.
Yeah, general, their budget was 70,000, our actual is 64,000. So it's $5,800 unfavorable. Those numbers don't, he's saying that we've got $22,000 in penalties, but here it's 64,000. I guess the calculation and the timing, if you could speak to that.
So just to address your question, so we have two penalty timelines. So we had a penalty timeline set in January, which would have reflected a year-to-date balance as of December 31st, 2019. And then we have the balance with the new tax year, which starts as of July 15th. So the current year-to-date would really reflect the balance outstanding as of the tax year, the new tax year. So we'll have to go back and dissect, I think, the previous year from the aging report.
I think I confused myself too.
Yeah, where I'm trying to get at is what the implication, what the total amount of those, of the penalties that are owing on specifically 2020 tax year related balances. That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around right now. What the total amount of that is. And so, you know, it sounds like it's 24,000 right now,
Yeah.
but that will increase throughout the remainder of the tax year and I guess into next year due to the TIP program. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, through the chair, this amount is at a point in time. So that point in time is October the 7th. So what might be the best way to look at it is when the penalty was set, the first penalty, January 15, which would have been for 2019, but then to try and get a point in time, maybe July 15th, when the initial penalty for the next tax year was charged. Because you'll have residents that will have made a payment even though they were penalized. So the point in time date would probably have to be established in July.
Okay.
Well, I think you understand where our questions are
Yeah.
and the tweaks that we're looking for to clarify it before it comes back to council. Are you happy with that, Jamie?
I think so, yeah. I think you know where I'm headed with it. They're current. So yeah, if we could just get some modifications back to council.
Yeah, understood.
Alright, so we got the motion, do you just wanna read that for everybody?
Yes, the Finance Advisory Committee recommends council to accept the report as information as amended with the division of tax penalties between the typical amount of tax arrears pre-COVID or previous session and the amount of tax penalty attributed to the current year.
And then we also needed to add the
The last
the 5-year year-end
Previous
tax penalty and arrear balances.
So for the current year for the previous 5 years, new tax
Yeah, the year-end,
year. Okay.
5-year. that would be the next council meeting that would come to, or do you need more time?
I can get it for the next council meeting.
Right. So I guess if there's no more questions, I can call for a vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay. Okay, our next item of business is the 2021 budget timelines discussion. I'll turn this over to Corinne again.
Thank you through the chair. So first off, I'm gonna take you through the high level, through the budget presentation that was provided to council on the 21st of September. And then from there, I think what that will establish is it will give us a little bit of an idea and direction on where we wanna move forward as far as the budget timelines, which is the document that I handed out. So on September 21st, administration took a draft budget to council, and included in that draft budget was information about the timelines, as well as a little bit of initial view at what the potential deficit surplus was looking like for 21 and 22. Keeping in mind that in this particular budget season, we are going to try and do a 2-year multi, or we will be doing a 2-year multi-budget. So the things that we discussed during that meeting were the operating budget and the capital budget, some key highlights of the revenues and expenditures on the operating side, and then some potential projects that and equipment purchases that were going to be done on the capital side. So the initial numbers that administration brought forward were projecting an overall deficit of $318,000. So part of this was a decline in revenues of $151,000 and increase in expenses of just under $167,000. So overall result is 5.6% increase in the deficit. And we've gone through this document as a group. This is what we provide on the variance reporting for our quarterly, and it went through high level and just discussed the various variances attributable to the current budget and some of the things that we are seeing. So the variances that we are seeing are largely our investments are declining. We just put in an investment of about $3.2 million, and our rate is 0.7%. So that GIC previously for 2019-2020 we got about 2.4%. So that's the first of two that are coming due in the next 3 months. So we're seeing quite a decline in our investment portfolio as far as the interest component. We haven't had to use that money, so we continue to roll it over, but it's just not going to make us as much money. As well, the tax line, if we keep taxes as they are going into 2021, and keeping in mind that as we discussed in council, our assessor is predicting that values could decline another 2%, which aren't quite reflected in here, but if we keep the numbers as is, we're looking at a deficit of about $47,000 on the tax line as well. So between those two lines and as well, and taking out the reserve draw that we had to utilize to balance the budget in 2020, we're predicting about $152,000 shortfall on revenue. Expenses by the numbers, so for I'm mostly focusing on 2021 because really 2022 is kind of driven from some of what happens in 2021, except for some large expenditures that are going to be taking place. So wage and benefits, we see an increase of about $76,000, and this kind of takes into account some increase in our benefit costs, increase in WCB, and increase into salaries and wages. As well, we have some increases on our engineering and legal side, and our utilities are also increasing. That information comes from our energy providers. They provide us some updates. So we're seeing some of those increases in overall transfer payments as well, and the transfer payments line really reflects some of the increases we're seeing in Schwach, some of the increases we're seeing in West End, and the reallocation of if we potentially move forward with an agreement for 2021 with the town of Okotoks on solid waste, so those costs are now absorbed in that line. You'll see the savings in other areas like vehicle maintenance, like general and building maintenance, and so we're seeing some declines in some areas, but they're encompassed in that bottom transfer payments line. So as I discussed some of our key expenditures, the other areas that we're experiencing some increases is some of the costs previously were absorbed by the province for municipal policing are now going to be absorbed by the town. So in 2021, our requisition for municipal policing is going to be just under 55,000. In 2022, that number goes up to 82,000. As well, we've put in some additional amalgamation funding and expenses. The expectation is that this is going to be pretty much a wash, so we'll get funding and then we'll have corresponding expenses to offset it. A couple of other expenditures, our bylaw enforcement, we are required to go to an e-ticketing system, and this is being mandated down by the government, so we're going to have some initial setup costs and some maintenance costs for that particular program. As well, we have added some additional budget amounts for roads. We had a significant failure on a road in 2020, and as a result we had to redirect a significant portion of our roads, asphalt and paving budget to repair and make those repairs to that particular road. So we've added an additional 40,000. Every year we already put in 100,000 to maintain the roads within the town. The reason why we do this is that it allows us to save costs on significant capital infrastructure projects if the roads break down. So this maintenance extends the useful life of the roads. So we've got a couple of other things going on in 2022. We have the lift station inspection. We have the off-site levy bylaw that is going to be completed, and we're going to do some tree pruning costs. So these are just some of the costs over and above previous year budget. So we provided the financial update today. That was part of the requirement, and we do use that as part of our financial planning and budgeting process. It gives us a little bit of visibility and insight into what we see going to the end of 2020, and it allows us, it forms a significant component of our planning going into the 2021 and 2022 budget. We are going to be doing an annual utility rate bylaw amendment, so we are going to be bringing some of those results to council soon, and all this does is it provides a bit of oversight and insight as to what the new rates are keeping in mind that the town's and administration's objective is to provide this service at a rate base. So the residents are paying and that we can recover 100% of the cost of the utility. So administration has worked hard to provide an initial insight into the budget numbers. Any additional spending requires administration managers and other individuals that are performing the work to provide justification as to those costs and why they're being inserted in the budget. As well, administration ensures that we're aligning with the strategic priorities of council, and we try to ensure that they're clearly outlined in the budget. Third-party requisitions. So the third-party requisitions are always the last piece that are inserted in the budget. So we've put some placeholders in with amounts. At this particular moment, Shrek and West End, the library, the Foothills, the cemetery, and those organizations that we get requisitioned from are still in the early phases of their budget process. So these amounts are not exact and not known at this time, so we provide estimates. From our infrastructure standpoint, we have a number of areas that we fund within our infrastructure program, from water, distribution, sanitary storm, pathways, roads, garbage, and fire services. Some of the key highlights that we've added in the 2021 and 2022 budget is an Occulta road turnaround, some capital equipment, diesel exhaust capture system for fire services, the e-ticketing software that we discussed, the operational impact. There's a capital component to this, the replacement for our plow for our one-ton truck, and some a lift station project that's going to be done in 2022. So there's a variety of projects. Of course, we've all, there's been a lot of dialogue around Sunset, so that is a large project that's coming up in 2021 at $3.9 million. Currently, administration is working on finalizing those costs through the engineering study, working with our engineering firm MPE. We are going on the second year of two major projects, our sewer storm infiltration investigation project and our water line pressure testing project. Those are 3 years. We're going into the second year. As well, in 2022, we're looking at some lift station upgrades, and that is a $270,000 project, and it involves, I believe, 5 or 6 of our lift stations and a variety of different components to be replaced and upgraded. We aren't budgeting for any road costs in 2021, so we continue to put a lot of in our operating budget to maintain our road system, and that allows us to keep our road projects minimal. In 2022, we're looking at Occulta Turnaround, so that's a project on Occulta where we are currently, there's some issues with land and where that road resides down by the youth mission, and we have the town office parking lot budgeted for 2022. So pathways, parks, and recreation, we're looking at $100,000 for pathways in 21 and 22, and that money will be earmarked for specific projects as needed and determined by that committee. So we have also received some projects for fire services. So they are going to be doing a big project in 2021, which is the last year of their SCBA equipment, and they are doing a diesel exhaust capture system on their vehicles. The e-ticket software and the plow blade for the one-ton truck. So there's the details from 2021 to 2026 anticipated projects on the capital side, and for various infrastructure projects. Overall, for the next 21 to 26, we're looking at about $12 million worth of potential projects moving, and we will be able to, of course, look at these. We're looking for primary at 2021 and 2022. And then we've got capital equipment, and this is also from 21 to 26, and overall that, over the next 21 to 26, we have about $893,000 worth of projects. So next steps is really what we're going to talk about today. As well, we'll talk about the reserves update and finalize some of the timelines between what the Finance Advisory Committee will be working on, and then what the deadlines will be and what we'll be reporting to council. Questions?
I don't know who got their hand up first.
Go ahead.
Alright, Bill?
Yeah, just help me understand, in the capital projects, I know I asked this question before, and I'm still not understanding this, is why does West End not show up, in these schedules?
So to address your question through the chair. So we no longer own the West End assets, so they're no longer our assets. So when we fund them, or when we provide funding to West End, it is an operational cost to us, and they can determine however they would like to, whether they wanna put that money in capital or whether it goes in operations. But we don't own the assets, so therefore, if we funded it as an asset, we wouldn't have anywhere to attach it to. Those assets have now gone to our partners, and that's same with on the Shrug side as well.
Thank you.
Shonda?
Okay, my questions are more around the process. So this is just staff weighing in on what they feel the project should be from 2021 to 2026, the 5-year period, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so when does mayor and council get to weigh in about what they're hearing around the town and what constituents are talking about in terms of good value for money projects that they would like to see done? That is, I guess, my first question. And the second question is, did each of these projects, particularly in the capital, did they go through the ranking process? And if so, is that information then, is that going to be shared? And to see exactly the details around it, how they arrived at the costing, how it made it into 2021 as opposed to 2026. And the reason why I'm asking is because I guess one of the things that popped right out at me was the town office parking lot at $290,000, particularly when we're kind of in amalgamation talks, and who knows where that's gonna go, and that's like $300,000. And I just would love to know how that ranking process worked, that in fact, that was one of the items that was identified for approximately 2022. So those are my questions right now, just to kind of get some clarification. Particularly, I'm interested around when mayor and council get to weigh in, because particularly they're the ones that are connected to the pulse of their constituents, the taxpayers, and what they're seeing should be done. Because as they walk down the street, constituents come up to them and say, you know, we've got that darn rink sitting there idle all winter. What are we gonna do about making it a place for the kids to hang out in the summer? Or we've got a soccer pitch that's sitting there, or we've got a ball diamond that's sitting there. And we can see that the campground has been pretty much oversubscribed all summer, because people are using our campground as kind of the staging area before they move into trying to get into the Blue Rocks or some of the campgrounds out in the Kananaskis area. So those are the kinds of things that citizens are talking about, and I'm just wondering if the mayor and council ever get an opportunity to sit down with staff and say, you know, this is what we're hearing, so let's kind of like talk about this all together, because to me that's part of the process. as part of that 360 degrees, understanding what the constituents want, that they're talking to their representatives about, and they in turn are coming into the, into administration and staff and saying, this is what we're hearing, this is a scuttlebutt out in the street, let's talk about, is it possible, is it doable, what's it gonna cost?
Yeah. Todd, he's already pre-grilled on the parking lot one.
So to take Ms. Middleton out of the frying pan,
Okay.
I'll take this one. But I think before I try to answer that, maybe I could turn it over to one of the three counselors in the room, and they could give their perspective on when that sort of thing happens, what they're hearing. Because certainly we bring forward what the engineers say is most pressing, and I'll talk a little bit about what made the list and how for the first glance this year. But I don't want to answer for council as far as their involvement in the process, so I'm going to turn it over to them and we can talk.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start.
Sure.
Because we had Sunset looming at $3 million price tag, the appetite of council was very much, we don't want to do anything unless we absolutely have to. Admin, of course, knows things that they think has to get done, and that's what they've put on here. We are going to see the TCAs coming forward. This was just a pre-look for everybody, but all that TCAs, those are coming. You'll be able to answer exactly which meeting as we go through this. But I think with COVID, especially that we're not out and about in the same way, hearing from constituents on capital projects is, I think, something that we should be doing better, because our opportunities for, meeting people, at least I know, I'm out way less, not hanging out at the school grounds or anything really. So I think that's a good discussion that we can have. I think council's of a mind to prioritize spending on Sunset, but there are some little things here and there, recreation opportunities that we absolutely need to be finding out what the constituents want. I don't know if Councillor Rob or Councillor Wilkie want to add?
Sure, I'll be glad to weigh in on this as well. Good question. We got that same report at our last council meeting, okay? That was our first exposure. And as Ms. Middleton said, we had a $300,000 deficit. Well, that just doesn't work, okay? So we can't raise the taxes 5%. That's just not acceptable to council, I don't believe. So we got lots of work ahead of us. And they're beginning, we've begun by doing a public participation, okay? We're gonna try and get input from the community to find out what the word on the street is, not just the people who we talk to on a day-to-day basis, but also anybody else who wants to weigh in that's in the community. So we're a long ways from finalizing any of this, and we gotta make some tough decisions. We can't have a $300,000 deficit, so it's just a preliminary information. But we have to rely on administration to say, these are the things that need to get done. And Sunset has been on our radar for 3 years, and it needs to get done. And we have been convinced, as much as we hate to swallow a bill of $3 million, it needs to get done. Okay? So that's sort of when we have to bite the bullet. And of course, we had capital plans in process this year, and when COVID hit, we basically scrubbed them all, pretty much. We haven't done very much at all in terms of capital. And are we any worse for wear because of it? I guess that remains to be seen. You talk about other things like the rink. We've talked about that at council. To use our facilities as best we can. But to make a long story short, we're not there yet where we have to make decisions. But we are where we get this information. These are the things, and we need to look at it longer term. It's easy to say, well, we only have to worry about 1 year. The council's not here. October of 2021, there'll be a new council, whoever that might be, but I'm saying, but we have to look at our community down for a longer term than 1 year. Okay, so I appreciate the 5-year or the 10-year looks, and these are the things that need to get done. The parking lot, is that a top priority? Well, I don't know. Is the diesel exhaust a top priority? I don't know. We've lots of things left to discuss along the way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm saying that this is preliminary, and we need to do some work subsequent.
Because the reason why I'm bringing this forward is because I've seen the document. I'm sure other people are probably seeing the document. And the very first thing that comes to mind is they've already figured out what they're doing. And so when you talk about public participation, it's not public participation anymore so much as communicating out, this is what our administration feels are priorities. And the worst and most insulting thing that you can do to the public is come out with something that's already three-quarter baked and say to them, we want to engage with you. We want you to help us understand what the community needs, because they're already seeing that what administration has presented is what they feel is required. And so they already feel that it's too prescriptive. And so so engagement and consulting with the public talks about a clean slate. And I know of which I speak because I've done a lot of engagement and consulting. And so what people think is you're coming out with a document, you're telling us that one of your strategic priorities is transparency. But it feels more like you're ticking the box off and saying, well, we've been transparent, we've gone out and we've met. But you haven't really, because what you've done is you've already developed a document and you've already taken it out and said, this is what we think are the priorities, but you haven't said to the community, what do you think are the priorities? And that's when that kind of engagement becomes derailed. Because already, and I'll be honest, because when I first read this, I thought, well, my God, they've already kind of decided. Doesn't seem to be any small fixes. It doesn't seem to have any focus on the downtown core, which was pretty much the highlight of this past how many months, because we had so much traffic, pedestrian and vehicle, coming through our downtown core. And so I guess I was kind of looking, if we're talking about the impacts of COVID, so we've got two businesses here in town, Eau Claire and Far, who have pretty much put us on the international mark, right? They've established their presence, they've established the presence of the town. And so you kind of start to look and think, okay, so what are we going to do to beautify the downtown? What are we going to do? We've got, these empty spaces. We've got a proliferation of children moving between the pool, the splash park, and buying ice cream, but they've got the rink sitting there. So what are the small fixes, the small amounts of money that we can spend that create an impact to these people that are coming into the community and are attracting maybe some businesses along that frontage? And this is not what I was seeing in here, and that's why I started thinking, boy, did anybody even talk to the citizens, or did they talk to the mayor and council, because they would have seen all the traffic coming into town. And these were some of my concerns, is because if we go out as a town to say to our citizens, okay, we want your input, but we've kind of already decided that, we're pretty much certain that we need to do the Occulta paving, or we need to do this. You're not opening it up for any kind of dialogue or engagement, because people are scared now to weigh in, because they can see what they've seen all summer, but it doesn't seem like nobody else has seen it. And so that's where I'm starting to become a little bit frustrated, because why are we not showing what we've been living through for the past 4, 5, 6 months with the traffic flow that's come through this community, and the people on our pathways, and the people moving between the diner and the coffee shop and the pool over to Eau Claire, figuring out how to get to Farbury, and it's congested down there. And this is our opportunity to showcase our community, and I don't see it here. And that's, to me, is very disconcerting, because I know what I've seen, and a lot of other citizens have, but it doesn't seem to be reflected here. And I can certainly appreciate the fact that there's a big ticket item called Sunset, but you know what, there's some small ticket items that could be addressed, and it's not happening. And so that's why I'm raising this right now, because I'm really concerned that if you call it public engagement, it isn't. It's public communication. You're going out and telling folks, we've kind of figured it out, but we're gonna come to you and we'd like to talk about it. So that's my spiel.
Can I weigh in a little bit too here? Just to to answer some of that, you know, I hear where you're coming from, and, you know, going into council, I think, you know, the view was, well, let's as a town get together and kind of determine what the budget's gonna look like. The problem that I've come to realize more and more on council is that you do need that starting point, right? You have to have somebody who's running the assets, I think, that tells you, okay, what really needs to be spent. And I think we get that proposal every year, and I think this council has shown the ability or the desire to kind of tear things up if they don't meet what we think needs to happen, or, you know, earlier this year make some major pivots on the capital side of things. Ultimately, council's got to have the final say over that, right? And look, the way that I view this public participation program is absolutely not as a communication. It's about hearing what people's priorities are, right? Because it's easy to get caught, especially right now in this COVID world, to get caught in a bubble, right? And so I'd love to hear some of those thoughts during this process. And are those things that are going to be able to happen overnight for next year? Maybe not, but maybe it sets us on a path where that's something that we can implement over a couple of years, right? But I want to make clear that, you know, we do have to have that starting point. It's and the exercise of creating a budget from scratch with 2,500 people's input would be challenging, to say the very least. So I always like to see, and you'll hear it during the budget discussions, we haven't had really those in-depth discussions yet. The whole idea of need versus want versus can we make room for something else, you're going to hear a lot of that, right? So it's not a done deal at this point by any means. You know, the hat that I wear is that we've got a lot of constraints that we've got to work within right now, right? And one of those is sunset, and one of them is the pressures that we're under from a fiscal perspective, just everybody in this province, right? So we need to balance those with some of the potential forward-looking initiatives, but I would absolutely love to hear some of those, and I have some of them in the back of my mind that I'm hoping to bring forward over the next little while as well. But I mean, this is a long way from a done deal at this point in time.
Okay, Councillor Rob, and then John.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments, Chandra, and far be it for me to think that we are perfect in how we're doing this, but I do believe this council has really tried. Last year we had the meat coffee in council. So this is another method right here is to try and, you know, go with the presentation, or pardon me, the public participation as best we can. So it's not perfect, and it's going to take a while, I think, before we can get it so we can say, yeah, this is working pretty well. And 3 years ago, what you said about administration, I would have agreed with, thinking that administration is trying to say, this is what council should do. But I've realized that that's not what administration is really doing. Administration is more on the ground in terms of what needs to be done in our community. Like Sunset is not something that would have jumped out at any one of us on council, I don't believe. I know that road every day. It's not a problem. But I don't know what's underground. But the engineers sure as heck do, and so does administration. So they're saying, these are the things that need to be considered in the upcoming years. So they're not saying we have to do that. I mean, they're not saying they are putting it in 2022 we'll do this and 2023 we'll do that, but that's only the first blush. There's lots of work needs to be done. As Councillor Wilkie said, we haven't had a chance to really delve into this yet, but we will. As far as foot traffic this year, everybody was aware of that, and it always frustrated me to drive into Black Diamond and seeing people all over and having places to go. And I'm thinking, I live in Turner Valley, we just don't have the businesses. We got two of the most awesome, like the brewery's second to none, and I love Far Beer, and the distillery, they're great assets. But past that, we don't have much. And Councillor Gordon has talked about the rink, making the rink an all-season facility, where maybe we could have some pickleball, or we could have this, or we could have that. And we have discussed that in the past, I know that, we haven't got a plan yet, but it's certainly things that have been come up. The access to the park, the horseshoe, not the horseshoe, the park, you know, that's Arrowhead Park is certainly a possibility, so. But as far as business is concerned, this is our reality. I mean, I wish we could bring businesses in, but of course, I'm not a businessman, I'm a teacher, a retired teacher, I guess, and a counselor, but I'm not gonna start a business downtown, and I have no control of what business wants to set up here. And unfortunately, what's happened in the past has seemed to have lent businesses going to Black Diamond and not being here. So hopefully that will change. Hopefully this post office move might open up a spot for some other business to be started, I don't know. But certainly, we do have things that we need. We do have a spray park, which, you know, I was involved in building that sucker, and I think it's a real good asset to our community, as is the pool, as is the library, as is FAR, etc. But it's a process. It can't be done just now. Okay? So we are striving to get better communication. We're working on that. And that's why we have a finance committee, because I'd like to hear from you two. I mean, I kind of know that's why I appreciate what you're saying, because I think I know what council might be thinking. We can't have a $300,000 deficit. That's the first thing we're all thinking. We gotta tidy things up. But it's nice to get people involved. But again, I mean, if it wouldn't be for Corinne getting all this information for us, it would be difficult to have any place to start. But because we got all the prep work here, we can start reacting to it and say, well, what about this and what about that? So that's my comment to you. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to rain in your parade. I'm just saying I appreciate your comments, and I really believe this is the process, and we're working on it. Are we there yet? No. I think we're better than we were last year, better than we were the year before, but we still need to do better.
Well, I want to respectfully say that I appreciate your comments, but the one thing that is going to start tying the citizens' voices in this town is the fact that you've already been very prescriptive in this document. I appreciate the fact that a lot of work went into it, but if the priority is sunset, tell the citizens that this is our priority. Leave it at that. Leave it at 1 or 2 or 3 items. These are our priorities. This is what we feel needs to be done. Don't start giving them town office parking lot or Crown Victoria or this or that, because then that becomes where you bog down and you get defensiveness, you get an argument about it. If you already know that you've got 2 or 3 non-negotiables, go into your discussions with that and say, you know what, we're open, but this has to be done, and we're trying to figure out how to be able to fund this. But don't go in with a list of 25 things when in fact you know that the non-negotiables are 3. People can rally their head around the 3, but they start getting bogged down in the details, and that's when they become really offended, because now you're throwing to them stuff that really, why is that on there? Why isn't this on there? Why didn't you consider that? That's all I'm saying. I'm respecting the fact that you've got to start somewhere, but what you did is you started with a very prescriptive list of items, instead of leaving it high level and saying, we've got 3 priorities in this town that really are non-negotiable for the taxpayers. They have to be done. And leave it at that. You can have all of this other information behind the scenes and knowing what the staff feel are priorities, but at the very least provide the citizens with a bit of free thinking around what it could look like, without saying this is what we think it should look like and we're gonna try to get you there to feeling that that's what it is, because that's what it becomes. And you gotta remember, the people in this town have a history. I've only been here 2 years, and I already know that the people feel that that's what they're being herded into, is believing that this is what the list should look like, and they have seen that the process is flawed. So now what you do is you're spending your time trying to change the attitude of the people in the town, and the best way to do that is by putting out an olive branch and being able to show that you really are changing. And I do agree with you, a lot of things have changed over the 2 years I've been here, but this is monumental. It's COVID time, everybody's talking about, here's your opportunity to pivot things, so pivot it. Go out, say to them, 3 things, top priorities, let's talk about what the rest of this could look out. That's where you're gonna get your better participation, you're gonna get your better engagement, and I truly believe you'll get better input into what's going to be a grassroots movement in terms of what the town could look like. And I think you as councillors will feel better about it when you sit down to talk about it, because you know it's coming from your constituents. And so that's why I'm really harping about this, because this is a prescriptive list. This closes down discussions, it closes down creative thinking. It boxes people into feeling that this is already a done deal. So, that's my spiel.
Yeah, I'm trying to get past the feeling schooled part, and into how we can move this constructively, because I was the one that was like, I don't wanna spend $75,000 on Christmas lights, like, I just wanna be the bare bones essential things only, and you're bringing the perspective that we need to be a little less boring and to engage people better, and I think that we can move forward with this because we're just at the beginning of the process. This survey didn't include any, I asked you this question earlier.
Yeah.
This survey didn't touch operating budget, it was more general. I think we still have time to, and we have motions by Councillor Waring and Gordon on the rink and on the signage. Those weren't in there and they should be, so that's, I think, just as, no? Or is, they're not capital projects, or are they?
No, so the motion was to bring back some discussion and possibility, report on the possibilities and potential costs
Yeah.
to be included in the budget deliberations. So those are coming back.
Okay, so those were missed then from a capital
They
listed
weren't missed.
project,
They
they
were
haven't been
asked to
developed
be
yet.
put in, yeah, exactly.
They were supposed to be brought back to budget deliberations.
That's right, and we're
But-
working on that, and they will.
But they're not part of the capital budget?
Depending on the price, they might be, yeah.
Oh,
But
okay.
remember, we also have the $100,000 in Parks and Recreation, for example,
Right.
that's kind of earmarked every year. So if council chose to do something with the outdoor rink, for example, instead of
Trails.
trail
Arrowhead
connectivity
Park.
or Arrowhead Park, then so be it. Or if they wanted it to be an additional item, they could do that as well. But we just haven't brought that information back to council yet. It's coming, and then you'll be able to have that info to deliberate on.
Yeah, there is a standing item on the rink as well to go to Parks and Rec, for feedback there as well. I don't know if it was fleshed out enough, to make a motion for spending it at the council table, but that's still to return, I guess, right? And that is the committee where a lot of that discussion happens, so.
Alright, we'll have, Todd, if you wanna respond or talk about this, and then I think we can plan in this process to address some of these concerns.
So I'm cautious, so first of all, Chandra, well said, and I'm not saying that to patronize you, it's true, and it is a challenge that I know, I can only speak from administration, but I've got enough insight for council to know, it's a constant balancing. And just, you asked a number of specific questions that you still haven't gotten answers to, so I'll try to collect my thoughts here. The list that you refer to, that's 21, 22 and beyond, we're only getting better at that. We're working on an asset management plan, we have an infrastructure management plan, and we have a whole bunch of other, wishes of the community and council that need to be tied in, and we try to prioritize that based on urgency, really, and money, of course. And so we're not there yet, although and you'll notice that things are kind of back end loaded. It goes from, other than Sunset, you need $1 million, and also, we need $4 million this year. Where's that? So we're still working on that. The feedback so as far as a priority or urgency, in all honesty, every capital item, although we will say, administration will say, Sunset's got to be done. It's got to be done. Otherwise, if you don't and it breaks, it's going to cost you 50% more. But having said that, you could roll the dice and try to get one more year out of Sunset, and then put a walkway down around the central business district, or pave some paths or whatever, and make this continue to make this a great place to live, work, and play, and attractive to outsiders. but unfortunately, we have to try to use a pragmatic approach. In small towns, the truth of the matter is very little of our money, we have very little luxury to put our money towards things above ground. As much as we love a new community center for some people, or more paving, or a multi-purpose hockey rink, or whatever it is, the truth of the matter is if we're being responsible, and I'm a Parks and Rec person, I've said that many times, I'm a Parks and Rec guy, and I'd love to see all that, but the truth is if we're being pragmatic and responsible, there are many other things that the money needs to go towards before we, fill in the blank. The truth is though, is when we talk about being a great place to work and live and try to attract business, and what do we hang our hat on?
Above ground.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so that's not lost on us, right? But from a council and staff perspective, it's really hard to ignore the lift station upgrade that's falling apart all around us in favor of, something above ground. And so when you talk about public participation, we have a number of mechanisms that information comes to council. Yes, we have a survey out right now, and we're gonna have 2 virtual town forums because of COVID, where we're soliciting that input. That is different from previous years. This council has decided that they're gonna make an effort to do that despite COVID. But unfortunately, when we do that, it's really difficult to open it up. Blank slate or clean slate, I think you had said, and we just ask everyone for their hopes and dreams and aspirations, because the truth is I think not every resident has a full context of what's necessary. You guys do, because you have insight. So we have to target the conversation a little bit. Now, whether that list is too prescriptive or not, I don't know. But I can tell you, the only thing that the majority of what appears on that list is sunset. It's 2 projects or 3 projects that were canceled from last year or this year when we weren't sure what was gonna happen with the pandemic. We wanted to keep our powder dry. Specifically about the parking lot, yeah, we're talking amalgamation, and we instructed our staff that everything you do through this budget process, look through the lens that we will be amalgamated. Assume we will be. We may not, but assume we will be. So we're not gonna ask for any money or spend money on something that might have to be redone or become redundant. But specifically the parking lot, it's in a complete state of disarray, and we're still gonna need 2 office spaces post-amalgamation. And so that's why that one was on the list. Now, can that wait till next year? Absolutely. It can wait for 4 years, and we could gravel it, and then we have to decide, much like our downtown district, does having a proper municipal office that looks proper and professional become a priority or not? As far as the list that comes forward, it really is about what we see as the most pressing priorities, and we can debate that till the cows come home. Heck, that's why sometimes councillors will say, oh, we got you to here, but you know what, drop that one below the line. This other project we like is gonna come above the line, and that conversation is still to come. But the sources of feedback that council gets is not just public participation during budget. We have advisory committees that are constantly giving feedback to council as the year goes on, whether it be PRAC or IEDC or this one, for example. And so that the feedback we get in the budget process needs to be open enough that people can tell us what they think and want, and it will. They're gonna get a chance to do that, but it has to be targeted to a degree. Otherwise, we never get new office furniture. We'd never hire a new employee if we needed it. We'd never buy new IT equipment, because none of that stuff ever is seen highly in the eyes of council or community, for example. But we know we need some of that stuff. So what we're trying to do in here is find a balance. And if the feedback comes back on the survey and the 2 town forums that, boy oh boy, they really want X, well, it'll be up to council as to whether they want to listen or not, but those opportunities will be there. I think I kind of covered it all in a variety of comments. So all I can say is I could not agree more with you. It can't be too prescriptive, but somewhere in there needs to be a starting point. And we can ignore some of the other things that go on that list and push them back a year, but we're just trying to make our best recommendation to council. I'd love to be able to build all kinds of parks and rec facilities and dress up the downtown, but then that's at the sake of other things. And I guess that's why we pay all these councillors such big money to make those tough decisions, because all we do is bring forward our best recommendations, and unfortunately as administrators, we take the pragmatic approach around it in that what is the most pressing. So I'm probably red in the face right now because I get quite passionate about a about this piece, but,
Wait, what did I hear about counselors getting big bucks?
Not you.
Not you, the rest of us do.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more that somewhere in there it has to be balanced, but gee whiz, it just sure seems like the list of essentials is so much longer than
Flex, yeah.
Okay, Gary first.
I just have one more thing to add. When I was a principal, you know, you get in staff meetings, you talk about items. I always found it was easier to come with a draft copy and then let people rip it apart if that's what they wanna do. Okay, and say, well, that parking lot's stupid. It's the same thing here. You have to have something to start with, and then people can say, well, you know what, this might be a priority for you, but you know, it's gotta go back a couple of years because of things we need to do. But it's always easier to have something, a document to begin with, and that's where I wanna defend administration. Because I think that having a document there to start with is not meant to say, this is all we ever think about, because we think of other things as well, and we're open to input that maybe things that we don't think about, you might, and be able to bring it to council and say, yeah, maybe that's more important than paving a parking lot, so we're open to that, but you have to have some place to start, I think, so.
Okay, and I would like to just add that because of the engagement I've done in communities, primarily Indigenous communities, that was the one thing I could never walk into a community. I could walk in with what was non-negotiable, like I said, the 3 items, but I couldn't walk in with the list because it shut down the conversation. And that's why I'm very passionate about this, because I've seen firsthand walking into a community trying to present something that I felt is important to a community, and it wasn't important to them. So that's why I'm very cognizant always of leaving it open, because you'll be able to separate the wheat from the chaff as it's coming through. You'll know what's important and what's just, you know, somebody wanting to put something in for the sake of being heard, to having that soapbox. And that's what's important, because you will realize what the community is really looking for once you allow that type of process to happen. And I just wanted to ask as well then on this, because you've got 2 sessions coming up, and I know that you want people to pre-register, which makes sense because it's virtual. You also want them to submit their questions beforehand as well too. So my question is, during this engagement opportunity, will they have an opportunity then, based on what they hear as a response, they'll be able to ask more questions, or will they be able to ask more questions based on what they hear other people asking within the forum? Because that, I find, it tends to be a catalyst. It starts getting people talking and thinking, you know, like you know, the beautification of downtown and just making a little bit more street appeal and whatever. Like, I could bring that up, and then somebody says, you know, that's right, because, you know, I see a lot of, and it kind of then brings out the best in people's ideas or comments, and having that spontaneity is probably more beneficial than saying, okay, you have an opportunity to ask a question, I will respond, and you'll get to be able to ask a follow-up question. But if they're not able to actually be able to raise their hand during the virtual discussion and say, you know, so-and-so brought up a good point, have we thought about this? Then what you're doing is, as well, then you're kind of sanitizing or structuring the conversation so it doesn't then become organic.
So, through Councillor Holly, so the answer is yes.
Okay.
We're looking for the preliminary questions so we can prepare.
Yes,
So we have
which
the
makes
answers.
sense, yeah.
But there will be some organic questions that come from that people will be allowed to type in the chat box.
Perfect.
There's just, we hope there's gonna be a great turnout.
Yeah.
We can't let it be a free-for-all, but if they type it in,
Yeah.
we'll answer it as they come up.
Okay.
And also, well, whether it's questions or
Or
comments.
take it away,
Yeah.
and be able to, you know, then talk to council and whatever more about it later, and saying, you know, so-and-so, there was about 3 or 4 people that raised this, or they thumbed it up, or put a, you know, smiley face or a heart on
Yeah.
it in the chat. So yeah, you know what, that's encouraging, because that's where you're gonna find, because a lot of times people are scared to speak up, but if they have the opportunity to be able to pipe it in, and they find that they've got, you know, 5 or 6 other people doing a thumbs up, they know that it's resonated with the group, right? And that other people are thinking that way as well too. Okay, that's encouraging, because I wanted to try to get a sense of what this engagement is gonna look like, because right now, I kinda shut down. I'll be honest, and I know what's going on, and I've seen the battles over the last couple of years because I've waged a few of them. And so, for me to hear that there is an intent to be really truly engaging with the public, but I would strongly suggest, if you're going to do a presentation, limit it to only a few items that you know are really non-negotiable for the citizens, because you have to put the money there. And allow it to happen, allow it to be spontaneous, and allow then the process between you and council to be able to forge it ahead. Because then you can honestly say to people, we listened, we heard what you were saying, we took it back, we had another session, we looked at some of the things that administration had brought forward and felt that perhaps it can wait. But what you had brought forward, you seem to be passionate about it. We'll see if we can make it happen. It may not be this year, it might be the following year. But at the very least, allow them, then revalidate it with them. Take it back out to them and say, we were listening, because I think that is the one thing that COVID has taught us above all else, is people don't feel connected, they don't feel like they're being listened to, and here's an opportunity for the town to be able to demonstrate it. Because you've got a lot of balls in the air, you've got amalgamation, you've got the budget, and we've got the second wave of COVID coming upon us, right? So here's an opportunity to really, I think, probably if you get the messaging out properly, that we're here to really try to do a new process, and we want to try to encourage you to participate. And it's not so much we are communicating down to you, it's a reciprocal relationship that we're looking for. I think you're probably going to find yourself getting some pretty good ideas and have an opportunity then to re-meet, regroup, revisit, and probably represent out to the community as a whole some new ideas that I think we're all looking for a bit of new. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to say all of this, because let me tell you, it's been quite the Thanksgiving weekend after I look at the package and I started writing and I started saying, okay, this isn't working. I really feel that we've got to look at it a different way, so I appreciate being able to take up the time.
Yeah.
Thanks for your feedback, Chandra. It's honestly, it's greatly appreciated. I think we all feel some of these on a regular basis, but to hear it from other folks who are outside, it's very, very valuable. So thank you for that.
Well, I've taken the criticism to heart in the fact that I feel over the years the Parks and Rec is what everybody really wants, but we keep saying we'll give them 100,000 and then we never do, right? And I think the idea of starting from the non-negotiables and then kind of figure out how much money we have left in MSI, and available funds elsewhere, to know what we have to work with, I don't know if you can get your head around that, if we could do better at that, communicating. I like that, I do like that, because we know Sunset, and so why don't we just start there with how we're planning to fund it and what we have left.
Just one more thing to add. You mentioned Parks and Recreation. I think they're a real good model for us to use, because Parks and Recreation did have public engagement, and they did listen to the community, and they did formulate opinions and suggestions and prioritize what should happen in that order. I think they were a good model. It was about a year or so ago now, but I think it's a good model, and we're trying to get there. You know, we're working on it, and we are open. We haven't reacted to the budget. Just said okay, thank you, and that's about it. So.
Yeah, Chandra, I think that was a really good summary of what we need to think about in terms of keeping the process as open-ended as we can. I think it's also important that somehow we let people know that we're very early in this process. That this document, which very few people have seen and very few will see prior to November 3rd, 4th, is available on the website, but not many people are going to go look for it. I think it's important that we remind people that we are early in the process. that there are critical items that we are up against on the revenue side, as you outlined, Corinne, and on the expense side, and we've got to deal with these things. These are challenges, but also opportunities. There'll be some creative, hopefully, ideas on the operating side. But version 2 is after the town halls, after the Survey Monkey results, and version 3 is in December. And in the interim, after November 3rd, 4th, there are 2 Finance Advisory Committee reviews of the budget. So there's a lot of process, and maybe somehow if we can communicate to the community at large this timeline. I'm quite sure how to do that, but the opportunity is to communicate that, and that anybody in the community is welcome to contact any of us on the Finance Advisory Committee or on council or anybody that they think they ought to talk to about the process, to keep it as open-ended as possible. On the capital side, Chandra, I absolutely agree that, yeah, having 2 or 3 items, and Sunset Boulevard is so overwhelming, it's hard to think of even what's in second place. So I think that one's fairly straightforward. So I think the opportunity is to develop some kind of communication that it goes on the website and that people can see when they're reminded about this forum that's upcoming on the 3rd and the 4th, of where they are in the process. They're really, and this actually came out of our August meeting. I remember making this point myself, was that we needed administration to come forward with public input. But I was concerned that it was too late. And I think administration's responded well by moving up the public input to the survey and the November 3rd, 4th dates, as they were much later in what was originally came forward at the August meeting. So I'm happy about that, but it's just somehow, I kind of think of my corporate mind of what we would be doing, which you've already done in August, was you provided some information, background to council about the budget process. Now it's almost time to provide a second summary that could be consumed. I don't think we want to be recommending that people go read this version 1 of the budget document before they participate in these meetings. I think that could be very counterproductive. And I'll just take a chance to make a point, Gary. I need clarification. If we're $300,000 short and we fund that by raising taxes, that's a 10% tax increase, not a 5% tax increase, because the tax bill is $3 million. So 300,000 and 3 million is a 10% increase. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Could be.
Yes.
Either way, it's scary.
Yeah,
It's just not.
it's twice as scary.
It just can't happen. Though.
Yeah,
No.
and I think it's unfortunate, like, we're grateful to have press from, Western Wheel, but unfortunately it did sound like in the article that this is more of a done deal than just a very preliminary thing. So yeah, I think the more we communicate to people that we're still open for engagement, we really want them to come, A, do the survey, B, come to these town forums, because we're still very early on. I think communicating that as best we can is great.
I think both Bill and Chair Cindy talk about something that's really important for us, council and talking. We know that preliminaries came back in September, in October we're doing this, but we're not doing our final budget probably till into December. So we appreciate, council really appreciates the lead time we have to think about the budget long before we have to make decisions. But we are aware of this time frame, but maybe people aren't. So maybe that gets you to the point where you think, oh, this is all done deal. It's not a done deal. And maybe somehow we have to communicate that, as you say, communicate it better, to say, hey, we're just the early preliminary stages here, and we have lots of process left before we get to where we have to make decisions.
Right,
Just
so I
an
wanna
idea.
get this back to the budget timeline. And I think when you're going through it, to make it clear when we are going to provide input and, to say, well, we don't think it's gonna fly with council to have a 10% tax increase, we need admin to go back and work on it. When are those discussions happening? What needs to be done closed? Who's doing what between council versus us? If you can clarify that as you go through the budget timeline, that would be really helpful.
So to address your question through the chair, so I guess one thing I do wanna try and impress as we go, it's a season, so I've tried to describe it as the financial process, the budget season, which to me indicates that this is a process and respect the process, and it's gonna take time for us to get to the finish line. So what we have done as far as our public participation engagement is we've tried to do a really good job of making it accessible to all to participate in it. And so far we've had good participation. I have to say that the survey has been well received. We're getting some really good feedback from residents on the survey, and I'm impressed with that. I think there's some good engagement. But I always kinda, as Bill, I go back to my business principles too. You have to plan it. You have to organize it, you have to engage and motivate, and you have to control it. And if you don't do those 4 things, it gets lost in the process. And so there has to be a starting point and a planning process. And so when we go through the budget timelines, and keeping in mind that this is with the expectation that this committee is gonna drive the budget process forward. So what I've done here, and I've talked with the chair, and I've talked with the CAO, Todd Sharp, is the next version, which is version 2, is coming to this group on November the 9th. And so with that, it's going to take into account what we've heard from the residents. And so we'll take that feedback and we'll put it into action. And then we'll bring it back to this committee. We'll have a discussion about it, just as we are having today over the numbers and what we've presented in the first draft. And then that feedback or some of that information goes to council, or it doesn't go to council. The committee here will drive that process. November 30th, we've scheduled a special meeting so that it allows us to have 2 meetings in November to talk budget and to move the process forward. In December, we can decide early on in December if we wanna take that budget up to council, or we can keep it here and continue to work on it and refine it to what we think we want it to look like and what we would suggest it be recommended up to council. As part of my mandate and to plan, and get us to move forward on these particular deadlines, it will just be crucial that we communicate and we work together to get to that finish line. So however that looks, after we gather all of the information from our public participation, which, like I said, I'm extremely happy with what I've seen so far. It's been the people are engaged and they're answering the questions, so pretty happy with that. And the decision making that we do here, we have lots of work to do. By all means, as administration, not handing you a $300,000 deficit and saying, here you go, and we're happy with that. We know we have to make some decisions, and collectively as a group together in committee, we're gonna make those decisions to advance the budget forward.
So, was your intention to have us talk about some of go into the budget today?
No.
Or not really?
No.
Okay. So, we'll wait for the survey results.
Yep.
Was there a comment section? I can't remember when I looked at. Was there I know the last survey we did, we had a comment section.
There was an open response.
There was an open, okay, so we'll get all of those, like the list of those responses, okay. And ideas that come from that, okay. I did have a couple questions on some, little things, but I guess I'll just go, asset management plan, was that taken out of this year's, cause it was in last year's budget, was it taken out of expenses? Those kind of questions, but we're not getting into any of that today, okay? Right.
Just one question kind of from that timeline perspective, only, tell me to bring it back if this is too far in the weeds on this. The utility rate review portion of the discussion, I know there was some work done around, a significant amount of work done this year around asset management. And I heard at a prior council meeting that, you know, the results coming back were that our assets are in a lot of cases in very good shape, and that that's positive for essentially what our replacement costs are going to be and when they're due. Is that going to be reflected, will that end up being reflected in some of the utility rate review stuff that we're going to see over the next few months?
Yeah, so are we seeing asset management, how it ties into those things in time? Will it be back in time?
It will. Maybe I can just talk a little bit about the asset management program. So,
Yeah,
so I promised 85 to 90% completion by the end of the summer. We didn't get there. We had a late start because of wet, rainy weather. We got some of our the biggest items done. So the big boulders in the bucket, if you will, are there. But some of the smaller boulders didn't get completed. So you'll have much more information to go on this year than you've had in previous years to inform your capital deliberations and long-term planning, but not the 85 or 90% we thought. Having said that, most of the work around utilities was already completed through the infrastructure management plan in 2017. So we were focusing on things like sidewalks and pavement and curb stops and some of those big numbers. So, I don't think there's much more to add on the utility rate side from an infrastructure piece this year. But we'll continue to review that every couple of years. But the one critical thing that we didn't do last year that needs to start happening is we still have a number of operating expenses, or a number of expenses related to utilities in the operating budget. So that eventually needs to come over if council sees fit. We believe, staff believes it needs to come over into the rate because it's attributable to the cost of delivering the utility. And so at what what's the right word? How much and how quickly will be reflected in the utility bylaw that we'll bring to you in the next couple of weeks. The utility bylaw needs to get updated every year based on previous year's expenses. That's the wording in the bylaw, and so we'll continue to refine that. But that's a long answer, Councillor Holiday, to say there might be a little bit of infrastructure costs built into the utility rate bylaw, but not likely, because most of the efforts we put into were in other areas because we already have the IMP done in 2017, and that'll be refreshed again. We talked about refreshing it again in 2022, but with amalgamation and possibly having to have that done collectively as a new municipality, it's still up for debate as to when that review will be done. It takes time and money to do it.
okay. So I'm not seeing here survey 2. I thought there is a survey 2 that we were planning.
There is a public participation, the virtual forums is our second phase.
Oh, there's not a second survey.
No, there's not a second
Why did I
survey.
think there was a second survey? I'll
What days
blame it on
are
concussion.
public participation?
Yeah,
November 2 and 3?
Public
Pardon me?
November 2 and 3 for our participation?
I
Could that be on here maybe?
believe 3 and 4 is our public participation days.
Could that be on? Could
It
we
should
add
be.
that on maybe?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not on this list here.
It's on for your November 9th. It's on for your November 9th agenda.
Right,
Oh, the
right.
actual nights
Yeah,
though
but
aren't
I'm
on
just
the
saying the
timeline.
days that we actually have it though, or not,
Yeah.
I'll just, maybe we
Yeah.
could add that to
Yeah.
show that,
I can add those on.
just put those dates in, cause they're important dates. I had 3-4,
Yeah.
November
Yeah.
3-4, yeah.
You're correct.
Yeah.
Alright.
And especially to the other date that's important is the closing date in terms of registering, right? Because if people don't register, they won't be able to participate.
Yeah, that's on the website.
It's
When
we
also,
have it on the leaflet.
But it might be good to put it on here as well too, especially if people ask counselors or
Sure.
us about, you know, what date,
Okay.
because, yeah, you want them to pre-register, and so to me, that's an important part of the timeline, the pre-registration.
So who's manning that whole technology? You kind of have me freaked out as to, you know, answering comments as they come in. Who's doing that? And like, is it the mayor sitting there with the keyboard reading through questions and comments as they come in?
we're still working on the
Okay.
format of that, but it's likely the CAO will moderate.
Okay.
Similar to you.
Just throw me in there, I run Zoom all day, so no
Oh,
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Counselor Wilkie's volunteer.
On MS
Yeah.
Teams all day.
So this will be, you have to, so you have to understand. This, with any luck, might have 40 or 50 people on it. In a virtual Zoom meeting. It will not be a free-for-all, it needs to be very structured. In other words, people will be muted, they won't
Yeah.
have the
That's right.
ability to speak. We can't have multiple counselors chiming in and answering, so it will be, follow-up questions, for example, a presentation, then follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And then answering the questions as they come in, likely by staff and or,
Mayor.
subject matter experts.
Yeah.
With counselors there to listen and observe and soak it all in.
Exactly, yeah.
Because these will be technical type questions, most of them, on the development of that. Now, if we have the questions ahead of time and we can prep the mayor for a few, but to just ping 7 different counselors and who wants to take that one, and, you know, it's gonna be very difficult. So we need to remain structured in it, and we're still kind of refining what that looks like, but, it won't be a free-for-all, like a committee of the whole where, you know, we discuss it and we throw it out there, it can't.
And it'll be recorded,
Yes.
and somebody will be taking notes then, particularly around some of the, items that were
Yes.
tabled, and then somebody will capture all of the chats, because once you go away from it, the chats are kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
We will do our best, yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So you can, there is a way to record those chats somehow? Alright.
And a way to record the presentation as well too.
Okay. Okay.
It will not be perfect.
No,
Right.
it never is.
Our
It's
council meetings
technology.
certainly aren't perfect either.
Close,
and
so very close.
The goal is to capture, the broad themes, not the individual minutia of it all, the broad themes.
Okay. So will there be, because you will have the survey results done, there'll be time to kinda get a pulse of where some of the feedback, so we know on those forum nights where things might go as well, or things that we can highlight, so that's good.
Yes.
And will you be sharing those results back to the public as part of your, kind of, pre-presentation before you start heading into your virtual engagement? Like, will you let people know that this is what we've heard through our initial survey?
I'm not sure if we'll have that by that time. I mean, council's gonna get a sneak peek in a closed session as to
Okay.
some of the preliminary results of that survey, but, the entire, you see here on your 9th and then obviously on the 16th, a presentation will be given to council, which is a public presentation of the results of what we heard in the survey, the results of what we heard on the online, virtual forums, and the themes and questions and answers that we provided, so, there's a lot of work here, so.
There is.
So we're doing our best to stay transparent and keep checking in and maintaining connected with council and the community and the committee, but there's limits to what we can do. So the bottom line, to answer your question, is the full results will come to finance committee on the 9th. The results of the public engagement plan will come to finance committee on the 9th.
Yeah. November 3rd and 4th are the days you're having a virtual town hall, correct? That's what come out on the flyer that I
Yeah.
got.
Yes.
Alright.
Yeah.
So the next finance committee will have a lot of information to actually be able to dive in
Yeah.
on the budget and
Yeah.
have discussions, so that's good.
And sorry, Karine, I know this is your quarterbacking this, but I can't help but say that has been the plan all along. Karine's had this dialed in, that everything's phased, we get you the information, you can see what we're planning on bringing to the October 19th council meeting, survey, some preliminary survey results on the survey, utility rate bylaw, franchise fees, hopefully, preliminary look at the asset management plan, or at least numbers, to inform committee and council's discussions on where we need to go to find $300,000 or set priorities on capital. I'm done, thanks.
Right. So is everyone had enough opportunity to discuss? Are we ready to accept this
I'll accept that.
and move on? Okay.
Budget timelines.
Councillor Rob has made a motion to accept the 2021 budget timelines. Any more questions? No? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Councillor Wilkie. Okay, reserve, 6.1. Reserves update. Ms. Middleton?
So through the chair, I feel like I'm jumping right back into the hornet's nest here, so. Anyways, the Finance Advisory Committee Chair, Councillor Holiday had requested an update on town reserves and it opened up some discussion on municipal best practices with respect to reserves. So I did have the opportunity to find a fantastic report that was developed by RMA in 2019 on reserves. So I used it as really kind of a backdrop for what I see as best practices and so for what I see for us moving forward. So I've attached our town policy on our reserve funds. We currently have two categories. We have operating reserves and capital reserves. Both serve very different functions. Operating reserves are specifically for anything from a contingency perspective for our operating, and capital is really about some sort of funding of either a large infrastructure project, either a large purchase of a piece of land, or any kind of large equipment. So that's currently how they're developed today. So what I did was I went through and I looked at, RMA talks a lot about what the key focus should be of your reserves, and I found it quite fascinating because when I looked at what a reserve is, so it's used to support asset management planning. It's should not be used as a measure of wealth, which I found quite interesting because I know that lots of municipalities and even government, we hear a lot about, oh, they're dwindling their reserves or they don't have any reserves. And I think when you come from the private sector, I don't think you quite understand that we always think of reserves as a savings account. And then RMA, when you go through their paper, they look at it as a way of saving up for something, a large infrastructure project that you might have to, if you didn't have that money, you would have to finance. And so the idea around trying to limit your exposure to large debt financing projects. So when I did some further digging, they talked about the unrestricted versus the restricted, of which we also have both in our, included within our reserve fund. What I did find the most interesting was the different indicators that could be utilized. And RMA used two indicators to, when you compare yourself to other municipalities, and one was a bit more based on collective expenses incurred in the calendar year, and the other one, which I really thought was valuable, was using your tangible capital assets as your baseline and taking that as your your denominator, and then taking your reserves as your denominator and doing a function of that as a ratio. So when I went through and I thought, well, I'll plunk our numbers in because the report provided some indicators of what might be optimum reserve levels, which I think is something, I know since I've been here, has been a burning question, not only with council, but with administration, is what should our reserves look like and what should they be? So then I put our information in, and for the first indicator one, which is based on collective expenses in the calendar year divided by total reserves, the average ratio, reserve ratio for urban municipalities, and keeping in mind they separated the larger municipalities from the smaller ones like ourselves. And they recommend 1.24 times. So when I took our reserve numbers and our expenses using our 2020 budget, we were at 0.93, and so we're slightly below average. So then when I went to indicator number 2, and indicator number 2 compares the level of reserves relative to net book value of your TCAs. I think this is an excellent measure. I actually prefer this one to collective expenses, because I find with collective expenses is you could have more of a variability in that number, whereas I think for the most part, our reserves, our largest reserves are really gonna be our capital. Our operating reserves, we're moving in a really positive direction, establishing the utility rate reserves and updating those yearly. So I feel like where perhaps the indicator 2, where it looks at the TCAs as a measurement. So in 2018, the average for municipalities was about 27.3%. And our total reserves right now, in total, that's everything, is 6.1 million. And our net book value of our assets is 43.9 million. So that puts us at a percentage of 14%. So we are about 800,000 shy of getting to the 27.3%. Where I would like to see us is maybe a little bit beyond the 27.3%. So where is the town moving? So our efforts, I think, the town has done some things in moving to a positive direction with a number of initiatives. So promoting long-term planning, which is really where our reserves, they sit together. That planning and the reserve number and doing something long-term, they're side by side. The utility rate review bylaw. So we're starting to review that annually, which will give us a really good perspective on our rate base and are we covering off the cost of the utility, and as well putting in some money into reserves to capture any contingency costs that we may need on operating, but also covering off some infrastructure. The asset management plan. So the implementation, we've talked about that the last 2 years, certainly how critical that is to assisting us with how our reserves, how we can build that and how we can plan long term. And then long-term planning itself, development of a 10-year capital plan will assist us when we're planning large capital projects and purchases. So we'll understand what that reserve number needs to be and how are we gonna accomplish it. So the recommendation, administration will review the existing reserves to ensure that the necessary reserve accounts have been established. So do we have all the reserve accounts that we need to cover off the contingencies, those large infrastructure projects? Administration is recommending that we utilize indicator 2, using the TCA and the net book values as our guiding principles and best practices as we move our reserve policy forward and as we determine what the reserve amount should be. Optimum percentages. So I think administration believes that if we can get to 35 to 40% to fund infrastructure projects, that doesn't leave us completely funding 100% of a large project out of debt. But if you have a large project like Sunset, it's quite unrealistic to think that we could possibly do 100% funding from reserves. We would have to save up for 5 to 6 to 10 years, which municipalities do. They do that in order to fund large projects.
And then upon completion of the asset management plan strategy, the capability to fund the replacement of aging infrastructure will exist and provide accurate funding requirements. So we'll know yearly what that number would be and what we would have to put away or have to have in our reserve fund. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer. With the condition assessment information obtained within our asset management plan, administration will use this information to prepare a scenario analysis on the reserve requirements based on indicator 2. So the intention is, from this report, is to get to a place where we can determine over a long-term plan what we would need to fund through our operating budget that would have to go into our reserve fund every year. So if our intention is to get to, for example, even to get to 20% over the next 3 years, we know that that would be probably close to 800,000 that we would have to put away in reserves.
It's more than that, isn't it?
Well, on the 6.71 million, we would have to get it up to about 6.8 to 7 million if we left our net book value at about $44 million.
See, I'm confused. If we wanna get a 27%, we would need about 15 million, wouldn't we?
Yep.
Not 6.1, like not 9 million, not 7 million. Cause if you, to get to 27% or even 20%,
Yeah, we would have to build,
so
but
that
each
means,
year,
yeah, but you gotta have put at least $10 million here.
yeah, over a 5-year plan.
Yeah, divided by,
So you'd have to put away about 800,000
per year,
per year,
yeah, or more.
over 5
So
years.
where are we gonna find that? So we need to get to if $10 million is still only represents 22% of the,
Yeah,
so that means to get from 6 to 10 is $4 million. That's 1 point something per year, so where do we find that? This Madam Chair,
Property taxes going up
where do you
under us?
find 800,000 a year, so?
Bill,
Sorry, thank you, through the chair. You're gonna get the accountant in me coming out now?
you bet.
I'm struggling with why we are looking at setting up a reserve to replace tangible capital assets. Why do we include the operating reserve in the calculation? Question number one. Question number two, why do we use the net book value of tangible capital assets? Two towns could be very different. Some town could have all new assets, some town could have all old assets. So it's the tangible capital asset top number is the cost that you need to replace. So that's what you need to be targeting, not some percentage of net book value. So just an observation. If you do the calculation on capital assets only, the number for Black Diamond is really the only outlier. It's at 17%. Turner Valley comes in second at 11%, and the others range from 4 to 9%. And just an FYI, Okotoks, and I'm sorry I keep doing it, but Okotoks is my bogey. They have tangible capital assets of 500 million and capital reserves of 35 million. That's only 7%. So, and Gary, I was struggling with your calculation too. If we wanted to get to double the 14% that we're showing in our calculation to 28%, that means the reserve would have to double, right? So, I'm sorry, I just lost the number. That 6 million would have to be 12 million. And that's just, you know, that's we're in the ether somewhere. That's
fantasy land.
I can't even begin to start doing a calculation as to how to amortize that over 500 years so that we can actually afford it. So I'm trying to understand, and it's tough for me, and I know it's been tough for you because coming from ATCO or coming from Nova, you know, we finance a pipeline, 75% debt, 25% equity. We have no capacity as a town to issue equity. It's us, the taxpayer, has got to cover that. So I totally agree we have to do something. We have to have a plan. But I'm having trouble with, this RCA, sorry, regional, the urban.
RMA.
RMA, thank you. I'm just having trouble with some of the concepts.
So to address your question through the chair, this is a starting point.
Okay,
So this document comes from RMA. Administration looked around for somewhere that had some best practices. And I know we compare Okotoks, and I know that we have different line items on our tax bill that are going to different reserves, and I know that they talk an awful lot about reserves, as well as Okotoks is a very young town. So I think they're just at the starting point of what their potential exposure might be over the next 20 years, because most of their infrastructure is probably under 20 years old. So we wanted to have some our administration wanted to bring some best practices. I'm not saying that we have to have 20% or 25%. I am recommending from administration side though is we have to fund for something that might happen 10 years from now, knowing that we can't do a 25-75%, so equity debt financing split. It just, it's cost prohibitive, or else we have to find a way to cover it off on the tax base, on the operating side to fund it. So this is a starting point as to how are we gonna devise a plan over the next 5-7 years that's gonna allow us to put away some magnitude of some money away to cover off, because Sunset's, $3.9 million. The next project we might have, in 5 years might be double that. And so I think we need to go down a path to try and build and put away some money especially into our infrastructure. And yeah, I agree, we're putting both operating and capital together. But if you separate them, the two, then we even have less in infrastructure. So this is a starting point. This is information, like I said, I gathered it from RMA. I feel like they're a very credible source as far as they do a lot of research in Alberta, so it's an Alberta-based document. It's a fantastic read. But I just thought I would, as it was requested, provide a bit of a framework as to where our starting point might be in trying to develop and enhance our reserve funds.
is that understanding municipal financial reserves document publicly
It is.
available?
Yeah, it is publicly available.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanna amplify what Karina's saying here, and I mean, once we shake off the sticker shock, whether it's what we suggest should go into reserves, or what seems to be best practice, or what our infrastructure deficit looks like in the coming years, the point is we need to get started. We need to start putting money away. There's no way around it. Whether we win the lottery, or we raise taxes to put money in reserves, or whatever mechanism it is that the council devises to be most appropriate, we have to get started, and we're behind. I don't know if it's any consolation, but the vast majority of municipalities are behind. Especially the older ones. Karine mentions Okotoks. They're a new municipality, their infrastructure is new. They've got lots of time to continue to set money aside to recapitalize, but the vast majority of towns and cities in Canada aren't. So we can argue about what that number looks like all we want, but if it's not in reserves, then we gotta borrow for it if something breaks, and that's still a cost to taxpayers. And so the point is we need to get started.
I just wanna say, Karine, thank you, that was one of the best explanations I've had on the reserves ever, so thank you.
The document's great. It's a really good read, so it scared me too.
Councillor Wilkie, did you have any questions?
I did. Again, thank you for pulling this together, and I think one of our 3 Poindexters in the room sorry, accountants, I mean, for asking a good question around TCA there. Look, I'm not an accountant by background, so that was really my big question was around that TCA. And I think I've got some clarity on it, but the big question that I have around that is that net book value of tangible capital assets, that is a depreciated value. Am I correct on that, Corinne?
Yeah, and just to answer your questions through the chair, likely the reason why RMA uses that as an indicator is it is an indicator is because this is the access that they have to financial information. So they don't have access to what your assets are depleting yearly, but they would have access holistically to what your net book values are.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because, you know, we often look at that idea of kind of replacement cost, right? And I know that that's, you know, then you've got to determine what your replacement cost is on everything, and that's part of the whole asset management exercise, I think, right? So it's definitely circular, and I know there's no easy way to get to this answer, but I always just worry that using a value in the denominator that's depreciated does create that inequality between communities with old assets versus new assets, right? And I think about ours in particular, because we're going to have the water plant, right, that is fairly new assets that we're going to hold our proportional share of on the balance sheet, right? So that's going to make that number a little bigger on the denominator for us, I think. But I love that we're putting some numbers around this, and I don't, look, it wasn't a surprise to me that we need more reserves. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. Oh boy, I struggle with the conversation that we just had about budgets, right, with how do we get there. And I guess what I'd look for going forward on this is just some thoughts and suggestions around how we start that movement towards that. Because that's the hardest part for me. It's great to know that we have a problem. I am having an incredibly difficult time wrapping my head around how we move the needle on this. So I look forward to continuing that conversation, but I'm definitely going to read that report. It's, you know, I need something to put me to sleep at night. So, but no, in all honesty, I love stuff like that. So I'll give it a read through, and I'm very happy to have that we're putting some science to this, because I think that's what it comes down to, is we just need the framework to be able to approach it going forward. So thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, my thoughts were how we handle operating reserves and how we handle capital reserve it needs to be a separate thing, right? You know, snow removal's an easy one. We look at what the maximum we think, if we got dumped on like heck, what we would have to have in a reserve to cover it, and that's kind of your top end amount, you know, so that's an easy one. Versus, you know, the capital reserves definitely based on our asset management plan. We also have to work into MSI, right? We know that we'll get funding through that, so, you know, judging based on that. So I think this will definitely evolve as we've got that coming to us. But yeah, if we could look at reserves separately as to what you guys as admin really think that the top end balances should be on those, and how we could work up to that over time, or if there's too much in some of those, or whatnot that should be moved to maybe the capital, and then definitely tying that capital asset, that asset management plan into this would be great. So work in progress, this is just the first glance, but I think that and the utility, obviously we don't have a utility reserve set up yet. I'm assuming that's going to get created.
We've started to put money into the utility, but I think what we'll do is, as we look at the policy, we'll try and make sure that it's appropriately dissected between the different utility reserves that we've set up.
Right, but capital, we don't have utility capital reserves. Okay, so those are the ones that'll have to get set up.
Yep.
Did anyone else have any question? I guess just reviewing where we're going from here. So is this something that's not going to, are we going to wait till we get the asset management plan in more detailed information and then it goes to council at some later date? This was just for us here, right now?
So this, through the chair, this was a request of the committee.
Yeah.
The committee can elect to, move it forward and can take it to council if you would like to as a report.
I would like to see, I think, the asset management piece come in and get those more concrete numbers, and then, and on the operating reserve, you know, what those more concrete numbers are, before, it's kind of a nice to know for council that, but I think we already know that we need to be funding infrastructure in advance, cause nobody wants to take out debt. I know that was a question on your survey, but financially speaking, we're always better to save than take out debt later, so. So I think that as a, I don't know what everybody else on the committee thinks, but I think if we can get more concrete information and,
Yeah,
We have that option available on the RFD, so if we
Yeah.
choose to, for administration to take it back and provide more direction with some asset management information that's available, we can certainly do that.
I just wanna manage expectations again around the asset management report. I mean, I think the fact that we need to start putting money into reserves for something, fill in the blank, is far outweighs maybe what you're gonna gain from what you see from the asset management study that comes in. I'm not trying to be dramatic or underwhelming, but there's still gaps there. So when you add that to whatever the deep utility infrastructure cost is, the bottom line is we don't have enough. So I can wait and bring it with the asset management, but I don't think that one's gonna inform the other at all. So I'm happy to bring them together. I just want you to know that, just beware, you're not gonna get the fulsome report when I bring asset management forward.
well, I think I would, before it goes to council, like to know, you know, a concrete recommendation. Finance Advisory Committee recommends that we put $400,000 away out of this operating budget towards asset management. I think that's where it gets useful for council.
Sorry, Councillor, I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
Whatever that number is, I think it starts with a recommendation, and then that forms your budget deliberations.
Yeah.
Where is that coming from? You know, is that coming from this? Is it coming from service cuts? Is it coming from whatever? But we can't put our head in the sand anymore. It's gotta come from somewhere. And now there's a target. So I couldn't agree more. So whether this report goes forward now with the recommendation, or you wait for a few weeks, I'll leave that up to you guys. But I think that's a great way to package it.
So do you think you will have, as administration, a recommendation on those numbers by our next meeting? As part of the
I'll have
budget
it ready
discussion?
for November 2nd. I had intended on bringing it to council on November 2nd, but I could flow it through the November 9th Finance Committee meeting.
Okay.
And you still have.
So
it
your
in
plan
time.
was to take this document then to November 2nd and then also include like an actual amount that we should be budgeting for at November 2nd?
No, there was no amount
Oh.
to be set into reserves. It was just to lay out what we found so far, what the pressing priorities are, and what the annual dollar value amount would be for those items in the snapshot, to give you an idea of what we're faced with, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. There was no recommendation on a reserve amount to be set aside.
Right, so it's a part of the asset management discussion at the November 2nd council meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. So then after we've had that, I think it should be an agenda item for us at our next Finance Advisory Committee to revisit it with that information from the asset management plan. And then we can include it as part of the budget deliberations. yeah, I mean, obviously, if you wanna use this report as part of your asset management discussion, I guess there's no problems, I see. But I just don't see this being as helpful as knowing those dollar amounts
Yeah.
for council.
Well, I'm just pulling a number, but the bottom line is I think the bottom line is we would need to get creative in order to come up with a palatable number to be setting aside in reserves, cause if you simply take the amount that we have to recapitalize divided by 50 years or whatever the useful life cycle of the asset is, the number is large and crooked, because we, like every municipality, are behind. When we built things and put them in the ground, we didn't realize we'd have to replace them in 50 years. And so we're behind. So I could give you the big, scary, spooky number, or try to, at least. But the bottom line is steps like the utility bylaw, where we just decided we're gonna start setting the fixed fees into reserves, setting a certain amount in the operating budget into reserves. It's better to start, and then when you get going, when you get there, you'll be able to see a little bit further, and this number is gonna constantly evolve. So I could pick a number for you at face value, but it likely would be unachievable anyways.
Amortization.
Just at a minimum,
Yeah,
amortization
amortization.
might still be unachievable, so.
Yeah.
I just looked that up, that's 1.6 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
a year.
it's over $1 million.
I just need a point of clarification, is I recall during the budget in last year in setting utilities, there was some discussion around the fixed fee going into a reserve. And I think the number was about $400,000, so if you took $60 or $70 every 2 months times 1,200 households, that's around the number you got. But I think I just heard you say that hasn't happened, that we haven't added anything to the.
Oh, yeah, we have.
Oh, we have?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been moving it over, but we haven't, I think we need to look at the policy itself to determine whether we have the definition
Yep.
of the reserve itself. But yes, we have absolutely been moving it.
Okay, thank you.
But you haven't got it earmarked as capital for,
We have some of it,
utilities.
there's just a couple of accounts that we need to set.
So full transparency, shortly after that meeting, we came back to council, you'll recall, and we acknowledged that we had miscalculated that number.
Yes.
It's not 400, it was gonna be closer to 200, because half of that 400 was already being captured for on the operating side, long story. But we thought the real number that we'd be setting aside through fixed fees every year was around $200,000.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Alright, so yeah, we're just not seeing on, like, we've got pool, proceeds from sale, amortization, capital reserves, that list. So that's what's going to be added on, follow up there.
Yeah.
To the list, once you get that all set up. Alright, lots of work to do, never a dull moment. So we'll look forward to seeing that this conversation continued at the next meeting. So we will need, what kind of motion are I'm freezing here.
So if we just use option 2,
Scrolling up.
let the finance committee provide other direction to administration.
Okay, and our other direction is to bring back more information at the next. Yeah.
I have that the committee advises administration to add more information along the lines of the asset management report and provide a recommended amount to council on November the 2nd, regular business meeting. Does that make
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna make you pin down an amount with council on the 2nd. We're gonna talk about the amount at the next meeting.
So reserve discussion and asset management report to the November 9th
Ninth.
fact meeting, is
Yeah.
what I believe I heard.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that's gonna be good. Okay, did you hear that, Councillor Wilkie?
I did, yes.
Okay. Could I have someone willing to make that motion? No one wants to go home.
I will make it, because nobody else was.
Only kept here almost 3 hours. Okay, motion to bring back this for the next meeting, from Chandra, all in favor? That's, thank you, Councillor Wilkie, that's carried, and we will, is that the last item? I guess I should be checking this. That was the last item. So I can adjourn the meeting at 4:46. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks all.
See you, Councillor Wilkie, hope your kiddos heal up quick.
Oh, you know what it is, they get back into these germ factories and it's just a matter of time, so. Anyway, I think everybody's gonna be dealing with sniffling noses the entire winter this year and kids being home from school as a result, so. Oh, well, we'll see you at the next one, hopefully, so.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Thanks, bye.
Bye now.
And he's only got 2, I've got 4. It's like
Yeah.
the germ cycle takes like full 8 weeks to go through everybody.
And then it circles back again for the next round.
Mutates.
The next wave, yeah.
Last Monday was
Just 1 second.